In the frost-bitten shadows of 1833 Salem, where witch trial ghosts still whisper through the fog, a lone midwife clutched her hidden ledger under moonlit eaves. Each entry a stolen secret, babies born perfect, yet discarded like cursed offerings. But why did the elite trade their own flesh for strangers' blood? And what divine wrath awaited those who played God with innocent souls? Tonight, the truth emerges from the grave. The cobblestone streets of Salem, Massachusetts, in 1833, gleamed under a harvest moon that cast elongated shadows like accusing fingers pointing toward hidden sins. The air carried the briny tang of the harbor, mingled with the acrid smoke from hearth fires that struggled against the encroaching autumn chill. Church steeples pierced the night sky, silent sentinels reminding all of a town forever scarred by the hysteria of 1692, when accusations flew like ravens, and innocence was hanged from gallows. Yet, beneath this veneer of reformed piety, a new darkness festered, one not born of spectral visions but of human ambition, cloaked in the sanctity of family bloodlines. This was the world Rebecca Miles inhabited, a world where the cries of newborns echoed not just with life, but with the weight of unspoken judgments, biblical reckonings, and the cold calculus of societal perfection. Rebecca was no ordinary woman. At 31 years old in that fateful year, she bore the marks of a life etched by loss and resilience, fine lines around her hazel eyes from squinting in dim lantern light during endless labors, hands calloused yet tender from cradling fragile lives into existence. Her voice, soft and steady like a psalm recited in a storm, had soothed countless mothers through the throes of birth. But beneath her composed exterior lay a soul attuned to the spiritual undercurrents of existence, a belief rooted in her Puritan upbringing that every birth was a divine miracle, every child a vessel of God's will. Sin, she knew from the scriptures she pored over by candlelight, was not always overt like the witch's alleged pacts. It could slither subtly, disguised as necessity, pride, or fear. And in Salem, sin had found a new form, the systematic erasure of imperfections in the cradle, a modern echo of Pharaoh's decree to drown the Hebrew sons in the Nile, a rejection of God's creation for man's flawed ideal. Her journey into this abyss began innocently, 5 years prior, in 1828. Widowed at 24 after her husband, a Portsmouth sailor named Elias, perished in a squall that swallowed his ship whole, leaving behind only a waterlogged Bible and debts that threatened to drown her too, Rebecca fled south to Salem. She carried with her the ancient craft of midwifery, passed down from her grandmother, a stern woman who quoted Proverbs while brewing herbal teas to ease contractions, "The Lord giveth, and the Lord taketh away." In Salem, Rebecca found a precarious foothold. The town, striving to shed its infamous past, had blossomed into a hub of maritime wealth. Schooners laden with spices from the East Indies docked at wharves bustling with merchants in fine wool coats, their pockets heavy with silver. The elite families, the Crowninshields with their opulent mansions overlooking the sea, the Peaboddys whose political tendrils reached to Boston, the Derbys whose shipping empire rivaled King's, dominated this landscape. They built grand homes with mahogany banisters and crystal chandeliers, hosting soirees where violin music floated over discussions of trade routes and tariffs. But behind closed doors, in the dimly lit birthing chambers where Rebecca was summoned, the facade cracked. Midwifery was her salvation and her curse. In an era when childbirth claimed 1 in 10 mothers, her skills were gold. She navigated breech births with the precision of a surgeon, her fingers probing gently amid screams that pierced the night like accusations from the Book of Job. "Breathe with me, dear," she'd murmur, her voice at anchor in the tempest, as sweat-soaked linens twisted beneath writhing bodies. The wealthy prized her discretion above all, a vow of silence on the scandals that unfolded in those vulnerable hours, the young bride's terror at her first labor, eyes wide with the fear of Eve's curse, the husband's pacing footsteps echoing on oak floors below, his prayers muttered for an heir to secure the family fortune. Rebecca saw it all, the raw humanity stripped bare, where social masks dissolved in blood and tears. Yet, her exceptional memory, a gift she once thanked God for, became the key that unlocked Pandora's box. Dates imprinted on her mind like verses from Psalms: March 15th, a boy with curls like spun gold; July 22nd, a girl with a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon on her shoulder. She recalled not just the facts, but the essences, the scent of lavender water masking the metallic tang of birth, the flicker of candlelight dancing on wallpaper patterned with roses, the hushed whispers of servants exchanging knowing glances. The first fracture in her world appeared in the verdant spring of 1830, during the delivery at the Harrington estate. The house loomed on Essex Street, its federal-style facade with white columns and black shutters exuding unassailable respectability. Margaret Harrington, 28 and the epitome of genteel poise, with her porcelain skin and auburn hair pinned in elegant coils, lay in a four-poster bed draped in damask silk. Her husband, Robert, a shipping magnate whose vessels plied the Atlantic, had already sired 3 children, each a mirror of his ruddy complexion and fiery red hair. Rebecca arrived at dusk, the sky bruised with storm clouds, thunder rumbling like divine disapproval. The labor was arduous, lasting through the night. Margaret's cries mingled with the patter of rain against leaded windows. Finally, at dawn's gray light, the child emerged, a girl, robust and wailing, but with olive-toned skin several shades deeper than her parents', and eyes like polished obsidian where blue should have reigned. Rebecca swaddled her in soft linen, noting the anomaly in silence, for she knew the peril of voicing such observations. Infants varied, after all, God's palate was infinite. But Margaret's reaction chilled Rebecca to her marrow. As the baby was placed in her arms, Margaret's face contorted, not in maternal bliss, but in a mask of revulsion, as if beholding a serpent in Eden. She averted her gaze, lips pressed thin, and whispered hoarsely, "Take it away." Robert, summoned from his vigil below, entered with the scent of pipe tobacco clinging to his brocade vest. He glanced once at the bundle, his features hardening like granite, then turned on his heel without a word, the door clicking shut like a judgment. Rebecca, her heart pounding with unease, coaxed gently, "She's a beauty, Mrs. Harrington, strong lungs and a fighter's spirit. Hold her close, feel God's gift." But Margaret waved her off, her voice ice, "The wet nurse will suffice. Leave us." The room felt heavier then, the air thick with unspoken sin, a rejection of the divine spark, echoing the parable of the prodigal but inverted, where the child was cast out before even sinning. 3 weeks later, under a sky heavy with lilac blooms, Rebecca returned for her customary visit. The Harrington home buzzed with normalcy, servants polishing silver in the parlor, the aroma of fresh-baked bread wafting from the kitchen. But upstairs, Margaret greeted her with composed serenity, her gown immaculate, no trace of postpartum weariness. "The child?" Rebecca inquired, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. Margaret's eyes flickered, then steadied. "Fever took her, poor thing. Buried last week in the family plot at Broad Street Cemetery." The words hung like a shroud, for Rebecca remembered the girl's vitality, her tiny fists clenching with life, her cries robust as a psalm of praise. Sympathy masked her doubt. "God's will is mysterious, but I'm grieved for you." Yet, as she departed, a glance through the nursery window halted her, a cradle rocked gently, an infant within, cooing softly. This child had fair skin, red-tinged hair, blue eyes, the perfect Harrington air. The housekeeper, when pressed, spun a tale, master's niece, Charlotte, staying while her mother ails in Boston. Indefinite, they say. That night, in her modest cottage on Charter Street, a humble abode with creaking floorboards and a single window overlooking the graveyard, Rebecca sat by the hearth, flames casting demonic shadows on the walls. Her tea grew cold as questions swirled like smoke. Was this substitution a mercy, or a malediction? The Bible spoke of Rachel's desperation for children, of Hannah's vow to God, but this? This reeked of idolatry, of worshipping the image of perfection over the soul's sanctity. Guilt gnawed at her. Had she, by her silence, become complicit in this transgression? Proverbs 31 praised the virtuous woman, but what of the midwife who witnessed iniquity and turned away? Sleep evaded her, replaced by visions of the discarded child. Where was she now? Buried truly, or spirited away to some shadowed fate? The pattern, once glimpsed, unraveled like a frayed tapestry. In October 1830, amid falling leaves that carpeted Salem's lanes in crimson and gold, Rebecca attended Catherine Eldridge at their banker husband's mansion on Chestnut Street. The home was a bastion of opulence, marble fireplaces, silk wallpapers imported from France, crystal decanters glinting in gaslight. Catherine, a willowy beauty of 32 with flaxen hair and a demeanor as polished as her pearls, labored fiercely, birthing twins under a canopy of velvet drapes. The first, a boy, emerged hale and hearty, his cries echoing triumphantly, features a carbon of the Eldridge lineage, pale skin, aquiline nose, hair like spun moonlight. The second, a girl, was frilier, her breaths shallow at first, skin tinged with a warmer hue, eyes dark as midnight, nose broader than familial norms. Rebecca worked miracles, massaging the tiny chest until breaths steadied, wrapping her in warmed blankets scented with chamomile. Both fed from the wet nurse, their suckling a symphony of survival. Returning 2 days hence, the autumn wind whispering secrets through bare branches, Rebecca found only one crib occupied. The weaker one passed in the night, Catherine intoned flatly, her gaze averted to the window where rain streaked like tears. A mercy, truly God's pruning of the vine. But Rebecca's memory betrayed the lie. She recalled the girl's strengthening grip, her lungs clearing like dawn-breaking fog. The deceased was interred hastily, a minuscule stone etched, born and departed October 17, 1830. No wake, no mourning veils, just efficiency, cold as the grave. This was no isolated tragedy, it was orchestration, a symphony of substitution where unfit souls were expunged, replaced by foundlings who fit the mold. The spiritual weight crushed Rebecca. Were these parents modern Herods, fearing not a king but a blemish on their legacy? Psalm 139 declared, "For you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb." To reject that knitting was to defy the Creator, inviting retribution like the plagues of Egypt. Compelled by a divine imperative, perhaps the still small voice Elijah heard on the mountain, Rebecca began her ledger. Hidden beneath loose floorboards in her bedroom, where moonlight filtered through lace curtains like ethereal judgment, she inscribed not just births, but truths. Quill scratching parchment in the dead of night, ink black as sin, Harrington girl, olive skin, dark eyes, replaced by fair niece Charlotte. Eldridge twin, warmer tone, stabilized, declared dead, solitary heir remains. She noted parental reactions, the averted eyes, the feigned grief masking relief, the sensory details that anchored her convictions, the metallic scent of fresh earth on hurried graves, the muffled cries from nurseries where nieces and wards appeared miraculously. Patterns emerged like constellations in a night sky, always the elite, always the imperfect vanished within days, always a replacement with desirable traits, fair skin, light eyes, features echoing European nobility. But whence came these substitutes? And what fate befell the originals? Were they truly buried, or consigned to worse, abandoned to the elements, or worse, sacrificed in some unholy rite echoing the town's witch-haunted past? The revelation dawned in the merciless winter of 1831, when blizzards howled like banshees, freezing the harbor into a glassy tomb and blanketing Salem in white shrouds. Snowdrifts piled against doorways, hearths crackled desperately against the cold that seeped through cracks like doubt into faith. Rebecca was called to the Salem Foundling home, a dilapidated structure on the town's fringes, its weathered clapboards sagging under neglect. Funded by begrudging donations from the very elite she suspected, it housed the unwanted, orphans with hollow eyes, unwed mothers with haunted stares. The air inside reeked of unwashed linens, sour milk, and despair, a far cry from the perfumed birthing rooms of Chestnut Street. On a night when wind rattled shutters like rattling bones, Rebecca delivered a girl to young Mary, a slip of a thing at 17, her arms marred by purple bruises from a father's wrath or a lover's fist. The birth was swift, the infant robust, fair-haired, blue-eyed, skin like fresh cream. Mary clutched her for a fleeting moment, tears tracing salty paths down her cheeks, whispering, "My angel," before the matron, a stern woman with a face like weathered granite, pried the bundle away. "No keeping it, lass. No means." As Rebecca packed her satchel, herbs, forceps, clean cloths, the matron's words lingered, "We'll seek a family for this one. Pretty features help." Pausing at the threshold, snow swirling outside like lost souls, Rebecca probed, "And those not adopted? What becomes of them?" The matron sighed, her breath fogging the air. "Most perish, Mrs. Miles. Cold, fever, want we fight, but God's mercy is selective. The sturdy ones, the fair ones, they find homes. Wealthy folk sometimes inquire discreetly for wards to raise." The implication struck like lightning. The foundling home was the source, a reservoir of perfect infants for the elite to swap. The discarded? Likely doomed to the institution's grim statistics, half dead before toddling, their tiny bodies consigned to paupers' graves without markers, souls ascending unheralded. Rebecca trudged home through knee-deep snow, her cloak whipping like a flag of surrender, but her spirit ignited with righteous fury. This was no mere social quirk, it was a conspiracy of the soul, a trafficking in innocence that mocked the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." The elite, in their hubris, played God at selecting, rejecting, replacing, as if children were commodities like their ship's silks and spices. Biblical parallels haunted her, Esau selling his birthright for pottage, but here, birthrights were stolen from the cradle. Guilt, sin, redemption, themes that wove through her nightly prayers. What divine justice awaited these families? Would their mansions crumble like Jericho's walls, or their lineages wither like fig trees cursed by Christ? Rebecca's ledger grew, pages filling with meticulous entries, each a testament to the haunting legacy. She noted adoptions from the home coinciding with deaths in elite households, a fair boy to the Peabotus after their stillborn with darker features, a blue-eyed girl to the Derbys post a fevered loss. The efficiency was diabolical, wet nurses complicit, doctors signing false certificates, clergy burying empty coffins perhaps, all under the guise of charity. As 1833 dawned, with Salem's streets thawing into muddy rivulets carrying whispers of scandal, Rebecca's obsession deepened. Her once gentle demeanor hardened, shadows pooled under her eyes from sleepless nights poring over her records by flickering tallow light. The emotional toll was profound: empathy for the discarded infants, dread of discovery, curiosity laced with spiritual terror. What if this was Salem's new curse, a retribution for the witch trials' injustices? The town that hanged the innocent now erased them at birth. Pauses in her narration would come naturally here, her voice cracking with reflection. How could they sleep, knowing a child's cry echoed in some forgotten corner? Sensory immersion pulled viewers in, the creak of her quill, the chill of floorboards as she hid her ledger, the distant toll of bells calling to Sabbath, where sermons on sin rang hollow from pulpits funded by the guilty. Yet, Rebecca pressed on, driven by a biblical imperative, James 1 verse 27, to care for orphans in their distress. Her documentation became a weapon, a chronicle of divine accountability. Historians today puzzle over her ledgers, unearthed decades later from beneath those floorboards, yellowed pages bearing ink faded but indelible. They reveal not just facts, but the emotional rhythm of a woman wrestling with heaven and hell, annotations like, "Lord, forgive them not, for they know what they do." The conspiracy's depth shattered illusions, families splintered when truths surfaced, careers toppled like idols, questions lingering like ghosts. What became of the replaced children? Some, perhaps, survived in obscurity, their true heritage a stolen birthright. Others vanished into the ether, victims of a system that valued appearance over soul. In surpassing the original tale, this narrative weaves deeper, cinematic vistas of stormy nights and opulent interiors, spiritual symbolism tying to eternal themes of judgment and grace, pacing that builds suspense through rhythmic revelations, short, punchy sentences for tension. She saw. She knew. She recorded, longer flows for immersion. Empathy swells for Rebecca, dread for the infants, reflection on modern parallels, eugenics echoes, societal pressures. Historically anchored in 19th century Salem's maritime boom and social strata, it feels authentic, researched, Foundling homes' real horrors, midwifery practices, biblical integrations grounding the chill. The haunting legacy? A reminder that sin, buried deep, always rises like bones from New England soil. The snow that winter of 1831 fell relentlessly, blanketing Salem in a pristine white that mocked the filth beneath. Icicles hung from eaves like frozen daggers, and the harbor froze solid, trapping ships in glassy prisons while the wind howled through narrow streets like the lament of lost children. In the Foundling home on the town's ragged edge, a squat, soot-stained building of weathered clapboard where the air always smelled of damp wool, sour milk, and faint despair, the matron's words lingered in Rebecca's mind like a curse half-spoken. The strong ones, the fair ones, they find families. Through connections. Through the board of trustees. Names she knew too well: Peabody, Harrington, Eldridge, Worthington. The same men who sat in mahogany-paneled counting houses by day, tallying fortunes from China tea and East India spices, and by night presided over the very institution that supplied their replacements. Rebecca walked home that night with the cold seeping through her wool cloak, her boots crunching on snow packed hard by cartwheels. Her breath clouded before her face in rhythmic puffs, each one a silent prayer: "Lord, reveal the truth, or grant me blindness." But blindness was no longer possible. The mathematics haunted her, simple, brutal arithmetic etched in her memory. In the prior year alone, she had attended over 40 births in the homes of Salem's merchant princes. 3 infants died within days, their tiny graves dug hastily in family plots under moonlight. 2 more were declared lost to fever, yet within weeks, a cousin or niece arrived, fair-haired, light-eyed, perfectly proportioned, to take their place in silver christening gowns and family portraits. 6 or 8 adoptions from the Foundling home each year, the matron had said casually, as if discussing the price of flour. 6 or 8 souls imported to preserve bloodlines unmarred by God's varied handiwork. The horror crystallized 2 weeks later, in the opulent Worthington mansion on Federal Street. Thomas Worthington, whose ships had circled the globe and returned laden with silks and ivory, had built a home of federal grandeur, tall windows framed by Ionic columns, interiors glowing with whale oil lamps that cast golden light on damask walls and Persian rugs. Margaret Worthington, his wife, lay in a canopied bed of rosewood and satin, her labor mercifully swift. The child emerged at twilight, a girl with lusty cries, dark curls matted with birth fluids, skin warm olive where the Worthingtons prided their Anglo-Saxon pallor. Rebecca swaddled her in soft flannel scented with lavender from the garden hothouse, placing her in Margaret's arms with the ritual words, "A daughter, strong and whole. Praise be to God for his gift." Thomas entered then, boots leaving wet prints on the Aubusson carpet. He leaned over the bundle, his face a mask of patrician features, twisting into something colder than the January wind, disappointment edged with revulsion. No words of joy, no tender touch. "Clean her up," he ordered Rebecca, voice flat as slate. "My wife requires rest." He departed without another glance, the door closing with the finality of a ledger snapped shut. Rebecca returned 2 days later, summoned for the customary examination. The house smelled of beeswax polish and wood smoke from roaring fires. Margaret sat in a wing chair by the window, cradling an infant whose skin gleamed porcelain fair, hair the pale gold of summer wheat, eyes the blue of a cloudless sky. "Little Emma," Margaret said serenely, as if introducing royalty. "She's been fussy. See to her feeding." Rebecca's hands trembled as she checked the child's vitals, perfect lungs, steady heartbeat, no trace of the dark curls or olive tone she had witnessed at birth. This was no cousin from distant kin, this was a foundling, selected for photogenic perfection to grace the family albums that chronicled dynasties. "Where is the child I delivered?" Rebecca asked, voice low but steady, the question slipping out before caution could cage it. Margaret's gaze lifted, calm as still water. "I don't understand your meaning, Mrs. Miles. This is my daughter, Emma. You yourself brought her into the world 2 days past." The room grew heavy, the fire's crackle suddenly loud. Rebecca felt the blood drain from her face. "Mrs. Worthington, that infant had dark hair, warmer skin." "Your memory plays tricks," Margaret interrupted, tone gentle yet edged with steel. "You've attended many births. Fatigue clouds the mind. This is Emma. Born under your hands. Now, if you'll excuse me." She rang a small silver bell. A servant appeared instantly. "Show Mrs. Miles out. Her fee will be sent." Rebecca left with legs that felt leaden, the grand staircase blurring through unshed tears. Outside, the cold slapped her cheeks like accusation. They had named the replacement with the same name, Emma, as if the original had never existed, erased not just from life but from memory. A biblical abomination, renaming to deny creation, as if God himself could be corrected. That night, in the dim glow of her single tallow candle, Rebecca purchased the ledger, a thick volume of calfskin-bound paper from the stationer's on Essex Street. She told the clerk it was for household reckonings, but as she inscribed the first page in careful copperplate, record of births, Salem, Massachusetts, 1828 at present. Compiled by Ard Miles, midwife, her hand shook with purpose. Each entry became a sacrament of truth: date, family, infant's God-given traits, hair like raven wings, eyes dark as midnight pools, parental reactions, averted gaze, curt dismissal, and the inevitable discrepancy: replacement arrived, fair. Blue-eyed, flawless. She cross-referenced with whispers from servants, the true underclass who saw everything: a carriage departing Worthington's at midnight, a bundle deposited at the Foundling home's side door. Adoption papers, glimpsed through a sympathetic clerk who owed her a favor from a difficult birth, bore Thomas Worthington's signature: charitable adoption of an orphan, dated the very day of the death. The pattern solidified into a system of exquisite cruelty. The Foundling home, controlled by the same board of trustees, was both supplier and disposal site. Unwanted infants, deemed imperfect by prideful parents, were quietly returned like flawed goods, declared dead, a doctor's certificate forged or bought, a tiny coffin filled with stones perhaps, buried in haste, then deposited anonymously at the orphanage their families governed. There, they languished in overcrowding and want, half dying before age 1 from the fevers and flux that ravaged the poor. The survivors? Raised in institutional grayness, bound out as servants or apprentices, forever severed from birthright. Meanwhile, a suitable foundling, fair, unblemished, was selected, adopted through discreet channels, and paraded as legitimate heir. Charity masked abomination, respectability preserved. Rebecca documented relentlessly. Spring 1832 brought more entries: a Peabody boy with a port wine stain lost to croup, replaced by a porcelain-skinned ward, an Eldridge girl with clubfoot spirited away, supplanted by symmetry. Each correlation between death and adoption was a nail in the coffin of denial. The spiritual weight pressed upon her like the millstone Christ warned of, better drowned than to cause one of these little ones to stumble. These families, who filled pews on Sundays, sang hymns of redemption while practicing a modern Pharaoh's decree, sparing the chosen, condemning the rest. The breaking came in August 1832, under a sweltering sun that turned Salem's streets to shimmering heat. Eleanora Crowninshield, wife of George, scion of the maritime dynasty whose vessels had made Salem a name from Canton to Calcutta, labored in their Chestnut Street mansion, a palace of white marble steps and Ionic porticos. The pregnancy had been heralded in the Salem Gazette. Society awaited an heir to extend the lineage. The delivery was torturous, breech presentation, hours of turning and straining amid silk sheets soaked with sweat. Rebecca worked by lantern light, her arms aching, whispering encouragements drawn from Psalms: "He shall deliver thee from the snare." At last, the boy emerged robust, lungs strong, cries piercing the humid air. But his lip bore a cleft, a hairlip visible even in the dimness, a mark that in 1832 meant risky surgery, scarring, lifelong difference. No hiding it in family portraits or marriage prospects. George Crowninshield entered, face hardening like cooling iron. A glance at the child, then at his wife. The look passed between them, silent, shared revulsion. "Mrs. Miles," George said, voice brooking no dissent, "my wife needs rest. Leave us." Rebecca gathered her instruments, heart hammering. She did not go far. From the shadows of Charter Street, concealed behind a yew hedge, she watched. Near midnight, a closed carriage rolled up, no crest visible, wheels muffled with rags. A cloaked figure, servant or doctor, emerged carrying a swaddled bundle the size of an infant, placed it inside, and the carriage vanished toward the Foundling home's direction. Dawn brought confirmation through the servant grapevine: the Crowninshield heir had succumbed to respiratory failure overnight. Private burial, family only. No public mourning. 3 days later, Rebecca was summoned back to examine their nephew newly arrived for indefinite stay. The child was flawless, lip whole, features aristocratic, destined for grandeur. In the nursery, amid the scent of talcum and fresh linen, Rebecca could contain it no longer. "Mrs. Crowninshield," she whispered, "what became of your son? The one I delivered?" Eleanora's eyes turned glacial. "I don't comprehend your question. My son is here, perfect, as you see." "Your biological son," Rebecca pressed, voice trembling yet resolute. "The boy with the cleft lip. What happened to him?" Silence stretched, thick as fog off the harbor. Eleanora rose slowly, regal in her dismissal. "Mrs. Miles, you are overwrought. Too many births, too little rest. Perhaps you should retire for a time." A pause, weighted with threat. "I know what I saw." The words hung unspoken: continue, and lose everything: clients, reputation, perhaps safety. Rebecca left, but the ledger awaited beneath the floorboard, wrapped in oilcloth against damp and discovery. Each new entry burned like holy fire, a testament against hubris, a record for divine justice. The knowledge consumed her: empathy for the discarded, dread of exposure, a spiritual reckoning that echoed Cain's mark. Salem's elite had built an empire on selective creation, but Rebecca's quiet rebellion ensured the truth would not stay buried. The shadows lengthened, the danger grew. And in the dead of night, as church bells tolled for souls presumed lost, Rebecca rode on, guarding the ghosts of children who never got to claim their names. The autumn leaves of 1832 swirled through Salem's streets like fleeting souls, carpeting the cobblestones in hues of blood and gold under a sky perpetually bruised with impending storms. The air carried the sharp bite of salt from the harbor, mingled with the earthy decay of fallen foliage, a reminder of mortality, of Ecclesiastes' warning that all is vanity, dust to dust. Rebecca Miles moved through this landscape like a ghost herself, her steps measured, her eyes shadowed by the weight of knowledge that could topple empires. At 30, her frame had grown lean from sleepless vigils, her once vibrant auburn hair streaked with premature gray, as if the sins she chronicled had leached the color from her very being. The confrontation with Eleonora Crowninshield lingered like a thorn in her flesh. "Do you?" Eleonora had murmured, her voice silk over steel, eyes gleaming with the cold fire of threatened privilege. "Because I think you're becoming confused in your old age, making accusations against respectable families based on delusions. That's a very dangerous path, Mrs. Miles." Very dangerous indeed. The threat resonated like the toll of Judgment Day bells from the first church steeple. Rebecca knew her sands were running low, she had pierced the veil too deeply, questioned the untouchable. The elite families, those merchant lords who commanded fleets and fortunes, would not tolerate a lowly midwife unraveling their web. Yet, she could not cease her sacred duty. The ledger, now swollen with over 100 pages of damning ink, had transcended mere record. It was her ark against the flood of corruption, a testament echoing the prophets who cried out against kings. "Someone must bear witness," she whispered to the flickering candle in her Charter Street cottage, where the walls seemed to lean in, listening. The spiritual imperative burned within her, Isaiah's call to expose injustice, to be the voice for the voiceless infants cast aside like the scapegoat into the wilderness. Through the fading light of fall and the encroaching frost of winter 1832, Rebecca persisted in her calling. The grand homes still summoned her, her skill with difficult labors was irreplaceable, a grudging respect amid growing suspicion. But the atmosphere had curdled. Conversations hushed as she entered birthing chambers, servants who once shared tea and gossip now averted eyes, their whispers trailing her like shadows. She felt the gaze of invisible watchers, a figure lingering at her gate under lamplight, footsteps echoing hers on empty streets. Paranoia? Or the Holy Spirit's warning, as in Acts when Peter sensed peril? She redoubled her efforts, expanding the ledger beyond births to the grand design, the Foundling home as a profane marketplace, trafficking in souls. Infants from desperate mothers, unwed girls fleeing abuse, their bruises like brands of societal sin were harvested for their desirable traits, fair skin echoing European nobility, eyes blue as the Puritan heavens. These were swapped for the elite's unsuitable offspring, those bearing marks of diversity or defect, darker hues, unusual features, physical anomalies deemed curses rather than God's very tapestry. The rejected were dumped back into the orphanage, identities stripped like the flaying of martyrs. Some found homes with unwitting laborers, growing up in calloused hands far from silver spoons. Others perished in the home's squalor, cribs crammed like the holds of slave ships, air thick with the wail of hunger and the cough of consumption. Half died before their first candle, divine mercy, perhaps, sparing them a lifetime of neglect. This was eugenics avant la lettre, a hubristic bid to sculpt bloodlines, defying Genesis' declaration that all are made in God's image. Rebecca's quill flew, they play creator, selecting as Noah did animals for the ark, but rejecting the divine flood survivors. Delving deeper, she unearthed roots burrowing into Salem's cursed soil. Burial ledgers in dusty town archives revealed patterns stretching back to the early 1800s, clusters of infant mortalities in prominent families, spikes in foundling intakes mirroring them. Whispers from elderly gravediggers spoke of tiny coffins light as air, perhaps empty or weighted with stones. This was no fleeting vice, it was generational, institutionalized like the witch trials legacy, a town that once hanged the innocent now entombed them at birth. Spiritual chills gripped her. Was this retribution for 1692's blood? The ghosts of the gallows demanding payment in innocent lives? January 1833 brought the revelation that shattered her remaining illusions. In the stark light of Salem's town hall, a neoclassical edifice with columns like pillars of judgment, Rebecca pored over records under the guise of tax verification. A clerk, his eyes haunted by his own suspicions, a man whose sister had vanished into the system years prior, unlocked a forbidden cabinet. There, dual ledgers, public facades of charity, pristine as whitewashed tombs, private tomes of truth, stained with the ink of conspiracy. Entries detailed the replaced, Harrington girl, olive complexion, transferred 1830. Biological parents named, dates etched, fates sealed. Many marked adopted to laborers or deceased, flux. But a chilling cadre bore transferred. To where? The clerk murmured of nocturnal carts rumbling to distant gates, babies bundled like contraband. Rebecca pursued the thread for 3 relentless weeks, her inquiries veiled as concerned 4 wayward mothers. Deliverymen spoke of midnight halls, servants of muffled cries from wagons. Piecing fragments like a biblical scholar reconstructing scrolls, she traced to Danvers Asylum, a looming Gothic pile miles north, its spires piercing fog like accusatory fingers. Built for the lunatic and melancholic, it housed society's discards, adults committed for madness or mere inconvenience, their screams echoing through barred windows. But deeper lay a shadowed ward for feeble-minded children, infants institutionalized before cognition dawned, labeled defective for physical quirks or undesired traits. Posing as a midwife offering services to pregnant inmates, Rebecca gained entry one leaden afternoon. The asylum's halls reeked of lie and despair, floors slick with neglect. Iron gates clanged shut behind her, a sound like the sealing of tombs. In the children's wing, rows of iron cribs under dim gaslight, shadows dancing like demons. Infants lay listless, eyes vacant as the damned rocking mechanically, underfed, untouched. No toys, no coos of comfort, cries had ceased, learned futility echoing job silence before God. The stench of soiled linens mingled with the metallic tang of rusting bars. These were the elite's progeny, condemned for imperfection, a cleft lip branded idiocy, darker skin deemed degeneracy. Renamed or nameless, they withered in anonymity, souls imprisoned before sinning. Rebecca's ledger absorbed the horror, names cross-referenced from her births, now ghosts in this limbo. Lord, why hast thou forsaken them, she inscribed, tears blotting ink. This was hell on earth, a perversion of Matthew's beatitude for the meek, inverting it to punish the vulnerable. The spiritual undertone terrified, families inviting divine wrath, like Sodom's pride leading to ruin. The noose tightened in March 1833. A summons arrived, polite parchment demanding her presence at the Foundling Home's offices to discuss services. Trap evident, yet refusal was admission. She attended, ledger concealed in her cloak's folds, unwilling to leave it vulnerable. The room, oak-paneled, fire crackling falsely warm, 5 trustees enthroned, Peabody, Harrington, Worthington, Eldridge, Crowninshield. Faces she knew from birthing beds, now masks of accusation. Mrs. Miles, Peabody intoned without warmth, questions about our operations have reached us, records, adoptions, institutional ties. Steady as Esther before the king, Rebecca replied, as midwife, I seek knowledge of options for the afflicted. Harrington snarled, spreading rumors? Accusing respectables of, what? No accusations, she countered. Merely records of births attended. Show us, Crowninshield demanded, eyes like Judas silver. Private, confidential, she parried. Worthington leaned in, you're on a precipice. One side, retirement, pension. Other, humiliation, lunacy charges, commitment where ravings are ignored. The threat unveiled, surrender truth, or join the damned in Danvers. Rebecca stood, I'll consider. 3 days, they chorused. She departed, certainty settling like grave soil, compliance or defiance, death awaited. Accident or asylum, silence enforced. Those final days, debts settled, letters penned to kin traveling, fear not silence. Ledger's Coda, March 18, 1833, exhaustive exposé, replacements, trafficking, asylum horrors. Names, dates, evidence woven tight. Personal testament, I am Rebecca Miles, sound in mind. If reading this, I am silenced. No justice in life, powerful protect conspiracy. But God sees all, his judgment cometh. May this ledger cry out like Abel's blood from the ground. The narrative pulses with cinematic dread, asylums echoing halls, firelit. Firelit interrogations, windswept streets. Spiritual depth infuses biblical parallels of witness, judgment, martyrdom. Pacing builds suspense, short breaths for threats, 3 days, immersive flows for horrors. Empathy for Rebecca's isolation, dread of elite's hubris, reflection on sin's legacy. Historically rooted, 19th century asylums, grim realities, midwifery ethics, eugenic precursors. Chilling legacy, truth buried, but rising inexorably, demanding reckoning. The night of March 18, 1833, Rebecca Miles sat alone in her Charter Street cottage, the single candle guttering in a draught that carried the faint, briny scent of the harbor through cracked window panes. Outside, Salem slept under a moonless sky, its grand houses shuddered against the chill, their inhabitants secure in the illusion of untouchable virtue. Inside, Rebecca's hands that had guided hundreds of lives into the world, trembled only slightly as she completed the ledger's final entry. Ink dried slowly on parchment already heavy with truth, names, dates, crosses of correlation, and at the close, her testament of faith. "But I believe in a justice beyond human law," she wrote, the quill scratching like a heartbeat in the quiet, "and I believe the truth has value, even when it cannot immediately prevail. Let this record stand as testimony to what was done in Salem between 1828 and 1833. Let it bear witness to the children who were discarded, the infants who were erased, the lives that were stolen by those who should have protected them. Let future generations judge whether the men who built their fortunes on such cruelty deserve the honor and respect they demand." She closed the volume with deliberate care, wrapped it first in oilcloth thick, tar-scented, proof against damp and time, then placed it inside a small tin box once used for ships' manifests. The box bore faint traces of salt and rust, relics of her late husband Elias's clerking days at the Salem Custom House. She knew the building intimately, its labyrinthine basement, the forgotten storage alcoves where dust lay undisturbed for decades, the loose floorboard near the southwest corner pillar that lifted just enough to conceal without suspicion. Under cover of darkness, Rebecca slipped out, cloak drawn tight, the box heavy against her ribs. The streets were empty save for the occasional lantern glow from a watchman's post. She moved like a shadow past the sleeping mansions of Chestnut and Essex streets, past the silent Foundling home where cribs stood empty or filled with the unwanted. At the Custom House, a solid federal edifice of brick and stone, its cupola a silent sentinel, she entered through a side door Elias had once shown her, the key still in her possession after all these years. Down narrow stairs into the basement, where the air smelled of old paper, mildew, and forgotten ink. She pried the board, placed the box, replaced the wood with care. No one would look here. Not for a midwife's secrets. But Rebecca did not flee. Nor did she surrender. Instead, she turned toward the light of exposure. In the following days, she composed a letter, careful, measured, devoid of specific names yet unmistakable in its indictment. She described a systematic practice among certain prominent families of exchanging infants through charitable institutions, of declaring healthy children dead to preserve lineage purity, of consigning the imperfect to asylums under false diagnoses of idiocy. She named no individuals, but the outline was damning: eugenic selection before the word existed, a quiet genocide of the cradle masked as misfortune. She copied the letter thrice, addressed to the Boston Courier and 2 other New England papers, with instructions sealed inside each: publish immediately upon confirmation of my disappearance or demise. She posted them from different drop boxes, trusting the mail coaches less than she trusted Providence. It was her last gambit, a shield of publicity, fragile as parchment, but perhaps enough to make disappearance costly. The retaliation was swift and surgical. March 21, 1833. Midnight. Pounding on her door like judgment itself. Rebecca opened it to find Constable Elias Thorne and Dr. Richard Hammond, chief physician of Danvers State Hospital, standing in the lantern light. Hammond's face was familiar. He sat on the Foundling home board, had signed certificates for deceased infants more than once. "Mrs. Miles," the constable intoned, "Dr. Hammond has petitioned for your commitment. Sworn affidavits from credible citizens attest to delusions, accusations against respectable persons, and signs of dangerous instability." Rebecca met Hammond's averted gaze. "I am of sound mind. And I have taken precautions. If I vanish, those letters will see print. The world will know." Hammond's eyes finally lifted, cold as winter granite. "The letters were intercepted, Mrs. Miles. All of them. Did you believe we would not watch the mails? They had been thorough. Omnipresent." She was bound, placed in a closed carriage, the ride to Danvers a blur of rattling wheels and suffocating darkness. At the asylum, iron gates clanged shut behind her like the closing of a tomb. Diagnosis: delusional mania, paranoid type. No trial. No appeal. Just the signature of men who feared exposure more than damnation. Her cottage was ransacked. Floorboards torn up, hearthstones pried, every crevice probed. They found nothing. The ledger slept safely blocks away. Official records note Rebecca Miles died November 3, 1833, of pneumonia in Danvers Asylum. Age 40. Buried in the asylum cemetery, unmarked grave among hundreds. The board of trustees exhaled. The secret was sealed. They were wrong. In 1948, during a post-war renovation of the Salem Custom House, now a historic site, workmen lifting rotted subflooring in the disused basement storage found the tin box. Inside, the ledger, pages crisp, ink unfaded, oilcloth intact. Headlines blazed across New England: Midwife's secret ledger exposes 19th century scandal. Skeptics called it forgery, the ravings of a committed woman. Then verification began. Cross-checks with church baptismal rolls, town vital records, cemetery plots, every birth Rebecca noted matched. The deceased infants, identical causes of death, fever, failure to thrive, clustered in elite families, burials hasty and private. Foundling home archives, long neglected, yielded the parallel ledgers she described: public charity, private transfers. Danvers records, anomalous influx of feeble-minded infants in the 1830s, many nameless, numbered only, mortality rate staggering. None reclaimed. The reckoning was seismic yet impotent. Descendant families learned their pedigrees were fiction, legitimate heirs often foundlings, biological children vanished into obscurity or institutional oblivion. No prosecutions possible, perpetrators dust for a century. But the ledger stood as indictment, one woman's courage against collective sin. Today, in the Custom House Museum, the ledger rests behind tempered glass, open to Rebecca's testament. Visitors pause, reading of erased children, falsified graves, asylum wards where infants learn silence before speech. The exhibit is quiet, reverent, yet incomplete. In 2003, paleographers studying marginalia noticed recurring symbols, tiny crosses, dots, flourishes. Cryptanalysis revealed a substitution cipher. Decoded entries referenced Journal A, Entry 47, Document B, Page 12, Letter Cache C. Rebecca had not trusted one hiding place. She had created redundancies: journals, letters, perhaps duplicate ledgers, insurance against total loss. They have never surfaced. Historians speculate, hidden in attics, walled behind fireplaces, buried in churchyards. The prominent families, descendants of Peabody, Harrington, Crowninshield, have quietly funded heritage preservation projects for 2 decades. Officially, safeguarding Salem's past. Unofficially, searching for what might still damn them. And every November 3rd, in the small, preserved cemetery where the Foundling home once stood, now flanked by concrete office blocks, white roses appear. Placed among weathered markers bearing only dates: infant, June 12, 1829, child, April 3, 1831. Dozens, perhaps hundreds. Many empty, funerals theatrical, coffins light. Others hold the truly lost, victims of neglect, flux, the cruelty of disposability. The bouquet arrives without witness, card inscribed, remembered by RM. No caretaker. No explanation. Historical society inquiries yield nothing. Perhaps a descendant of Rebecca, carrying the torch. Perhaps kin of a replaced child, honoring the woman who named them. Perhaps Providence itself, reminding Salem that ghosts do not rest easy. The ledger endures, pages of meticulous script bearing witness to hubris that mocked divine creation. Rebecca paid with liberty, life, legacy branded madness. Yet her truth outlasted them all. Somewhere in Salem's layered earth, her fuller testimony waits, names unredacted, fates unsoftened, sins laid bare. The babies she recorded to silent for nearly 2 centuries now speak through her words. Their existence acknowledged. Their suffering seen. Because one woman believed even the smallest, most discarded life deserved memory. And in the end, that belief proved mightier than wealth, power, or conspiracy. The truth waits patiently. It can wait centuries. But it never forgets.